As promised, last episode, we got to the end and we were talking about the ability to do an entire show on decel. And we talk about it a lot. And for the listeners that may be thinking, like, what does this have to do with hitting or throwing? And Travis and I often say a lot. We're going to get into a deeper discussion today and explain this thoroughly. So I've used this analogy in presentations and clinics in the past. And I say one way to really understand decel is if I'm in a car and I'm going 70 miles an hour down the road and a stoplight or stop sign approaches from afar. I don't want to gingerly, lightly tap the brakes over a long period of time and very easily roll and slow down to a complete stop to that stop sign. What we want to do is imagine that Travis and I are in the front seat of this car. Neither one of us have our seatbelts on. And I want to drive this same car 70 miles an hour. And to stop it, I want to stop it as abruptly as possible by running it into a tree. Now, by hitting the tree without our seatbelts on and stopping abruptly at 70 miles an hour, Travis and I are going to continue forward as the car stops, and our heads are going to go through the windshield. Decel of a hitter is the ability to stop rotation as quickly as possible. And then what that allows us to do then, when the body stops rotating, the bat then is Travis and I's head going through the windshield. It's going to be propelled forward on a predetermined path that if we slot the bat correctly, will stay in a big hitting window and increase bat speed. So that's kind of an easy analogy to understand really what is taking angular velocity, that's your turn speed. The body is turning, we're rotating in a throw or a hit, and turning it into usable linear velocity, whether that be the ball propelled out of my arm or the bat head going forward into the ball. Travis, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good analogy. I like to think about, I was kind of explaining it to kids as two people that are running a race. And if those two people start even with each other and they run the same speed, they're going to finish the race at the same time. If one of those people has a little bit of a head start and they run the same speed, the person with a little head start is going to win the race by a little bit. If you have the third race, which is the one person has the head start again, they're running the race and they run the same speed, but the person behind them grabs them and pulls them, they will, in essence, take some of that momentum from the other person. So if they slow the other person down by 1 mile an hour, they're going to gain that 1 mile an hour in themselves. So they're not going to completely stop the other part, but they're slowing down and taking as much as they slow down the other part from, which would be like your car analogy, where if I'm moving a certain speed, if something stops, something else can keep moving that speed. But if it slows down gingerly, the other part slows down gingerly as well with it. So
Correct.
I think I like
the benefits here. Yeah, I'm gonna go on the swing, and you can touch on throwing as you see fit, Travis. Decel, you can somewhat see it, but you can also be fooled. There are guys that will finish over rotated to the pull side, but are actually really good decel into the ball. So your eye will fool you at times on this. But generally, when I'm working on it, I'll say I want your belly button to stick in the direction of the hit. Or if we're doing medicine ball tosses, I'll say don't let your belly button cross the pitcher. Try to keep it, if I'm a right-handed hitter, keep your belly button going no further than where the second baseman plays, just to try to abruptly stop rotation. But it's really hard to see with your eye. And this is where the 3D sensors, in my mind, have the most value. We've consulted and used KVest for a number of years, and going back to 20 years ago when I got my master's in human kinetics, we were doing some very rudimentary 3D analysis, and we weren't looking at decel patterns at that time. What we were looking for was sequencing, and sequencing was the most efficient way to flow energy through the body for the most energy into the bat. But that doesn't mean a hitter is better or worse. There's, I would say, probably more than half of major league players or professional players that we've tested aren't in sequence. And from talking to the golf experts, they say the same thing with golfers, just your unique pattern. So at the beginning, we were searching for, well, angular speed must mean, the ability to turn fast means that I'm going to have more bat speed, or that is a higher number is always good, because that's just kind of the way we all work. More is always better, right? And I don't look at the 3D technology that way anymore. And what I do get out of it the most is the ability to get the hood and see deceleration patterns. Travis, guys are better than worse at this. And I think you've done an outstanding job of incorporating things into movement prep. How do we train this decel if mine isn't what I want it to be? I've done this in baseball for, consciously, we haven't done it in baseball. There have been some cues that hitters have used over time that I think make better decel, but how do we actually get into training this?
So I use multiple levels kind of training decel. First is obviously, again, like part of it is just you have to know somebody's movement pattern. So you have to do an assessment. Guys with bigger ranges of motion tend to struggle more with decel than people with shorter ranges of motion.
Why?
What's that?
Why?
Bigger range of motion just takes longer to get up to full speed and shut down. So having more range of motion is going to allow for more space to turn in a rotary fashion, especially when you're talking internal, external rotation of the hip, thoracic, where less range of motion is going to essentially force the athlete into a quicker speed up and slow down pattern, or they would have to have some sort of compensation by front leg rolling open, front foot rolling over to give more space to get up to speed. So knowing that, there's going to be certain points.
Hold that thought for a second. So I'm going to use another analogy here as you're getting into this training scenario, because we've both said there's give and take of this, right? The guys with more range of motion, and I'm going to use this analogy and picture it. So Travis and I, again, almost in the style of playing tug of war, I'm going to have a 2-foot rope in my hands. Travis is going to be standing as close to me as possible, so there's slack in this rope, and he's holding the other end. What Travis is going to do is quickly as possible backpedal to get this rope tight. Once this 2-foot rope gets tight, I'm going to begin swinging him around. He's going to go around in a circle. I'm going to swing him. So it's not going to take very long for him to get that rope tight. However, it's going to take him longer to get that rope tight and take the slack out of it. But the benefit is once he gets the slack out of it, he's going to be able to rotate faster. So you can see the give and take here. If I take the slack out, albeit a longer, let's say a longer time to impact, more potential bat speed. You see that with these guys with very big ranges of motion. I would picture like a Bryce Harper, or picturing Josh Donaldson, very big moves, likely very loose movers. With that comes a lot more swing and miss, because you got to make your decisions sooner because it takes longer to take that slack out. The benefit of that shorter rope guy is they can get the slack out really quickly, but they're going to have to use more just sheer strength and mass in most circumstances to get the bat up to a full speed, up to a high speed. So you can have higher bat speed with this loose mover capability than what your strength would often allow you, as long as you can stabilize that range of motion, which is Travis is getting into now. It's a very long-winded explanation of the differences between less mobility and more mobility. Go ahead, T.
No, that's good. Like that's an important part. And again, part of that is knowing somebody's movement capabilities. So step one would be understanding that obviously, like in the weight room, in movement prep, that stuff all takes time to actually fully come to fruition. It's not like you can go work out one day and you're all of a sudden stronger or more stable or have better body control. So, step one is typically see if there's a way that you can manually shorten some of the systems. So if we're talking like lower half decel, if we're talking like pelvic decel, it would be starting off a lot of times with having a hitter close off their front foot. So basically striding closer to the plate with their lead side, which is going to limit some of the range of motion into the lead leg and hip. So I usually start there, because if you can essentially make that easier in a shorter time frame to help the hitter in a more rapid time versus what it will take in the weight room, we'll typically start with stuff like that. We'll do check swing work. So check swing work, essentially, when you're going full speed, is going to force the hitter to find a connected, shorter move, because we're limiting the amount of time that they have to get up to full speed. So basically, you're challenging someone and seeing if they can manually shut down some of that range of motion and some of that speed on their own, through a check swing. And immediately, like when we do those, you can tell the kids that have more of a strength issue versus range of motion or body control issue, because they're not going to be able to stop very fast in their check swing. And then a lot of times their next one will be like an incredibly slow check swing, just so that they can stop essentially on time with the check swing.
Yeah, stay there for a minute. So let's talk about that too. So there's a neurological component that we always joke with professional hitters the first time they do this. And so people don't understand necessarily why we use the PVCs. That's just a way safer way to do these check swings with a lighter object in your hands. But when we do this the first time with professional players, all of them turn way slower than what you and I do, who have done this hundreds of thousands of times. And we make fun of them, say, here I am, a slightly recently out of shape 44-year-old man, and I can get up to speed and shut it down faster than these professional athletes. And the reason is the brain is always, it's a protectionist unit. So it's always trying to protect the body when it doesn't know what is safe. So if I tell you to get up to speed as quickly as possible and shut it down, and I've never worked on that before consciously, I don't know how good my brakes are. So what am I going to do? I'm going to accelerate slower to where the brain deems, oh, this is safe. I can slow this down by gingerly putting on the brake. Then we make fun of them. And after a couple reps, I figure out, oh, no, I can accelerate faster and I can decelerate faster. But if you've never worked on that, it's not going to transfer over into an unconscious movement. That is the swing. You know, at that point, we're just, especially in a game, it's a test, right? My body is doing what it's been trained to do. So there is a neurological component of, again, why we train this way. So it does become automatic for the brain to say, oh, I can shut down quicker. And then we've already talked about the benefits of doing so. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's typically where we'll typically try to start first. There's a couple of things that we'd go into as we go through that, just in trying to do a little bit more manual. What is the body capable of? Can we make this correction without having to spend as much time as it's going to take in the weight room to get that? Then we use, obviously, movement prep. Movement prep is a little bit more of a short term. Let's get the body feeling like it's making the brain push the muscles to fire the way we want them to, which would be something simple like a medicine ball throw. So using the medicine ball throw, having tested that with obviously K motion, even on force plate, that when you have something heavier in your arms, your body's awareness of being able to shut down to be able to move that heavier object typically will allow for better deceleration as well, simply because it has to move a heavier object at the end of the chain. So we'll do med ball throws as a hitter. We'll typically do those from every, let's say, pitch height. So we're doing them from higher positions, more of a athletic bent over position for lower ones. We'll work those essentially to every direction of the field. So we'll do some med balls throws to the pull side, some straight forward towards center, some towards right field. We will do for prep a lot of band work. So we're doing a lot of isometric holds. We're doing a lot of eccentric and concentric, which is going to promote for us a lot of anti-rotation, which is just the body's ability to stop rotation. And we'll do that from multiple positions as well. Then we'll go through even a progression where we're going to use med balls with athletes catching a med ball. So we'll start even from the standpoint of like over rotation into a swing and throw a med ball into the back side of their load side of their swing and force them to be able to stabilize it. Then move from there to stabilizing with a throw off of that. We'll do the same thing on the front side through the end of the swing, having them catch a med ball at the end of their swing. So basically they'll get through where the end of their swing would be. and throw a med ball through the end of their swing and have them continue to stabilize the end range of motion there at the end of their swing. So there's a lot of different things that we'll do on a daily basis, and obviously like being able to incorporate that on a more consistent basis is where it not just only helps in prep for that day's swinging, but obviously will help in the long term of what they're doing. And obviously a lot of these things we do in conjunction with like the swing prep stuff we would do, like the check swings or closing off the front side. And every athlete's obviously different. So what their prescription of what they're going to do with those is going to be different based on their necessity that they need as well.
How does this play in for a thrower? We've talked a little bit about hitting here, and I'm going to get back into hitting in a little while, but do the same principles in my mind would have to be just as consistent for a thrower, correct?
Yeah, really the only difference between the two is that the longevity of the rotation is longer in a thrower because they're finishing obviously with one arm continuing on through a move because they're not having to track essentially a ball coming at them and having to stabilize their head and stay in one position. So the range that they rotate is a little bit more, but it's basically the same. I mean, when you think about how it moves, the energy is going to move from segment to segment the same way. It's just going to transmit through the arm faster because it's a single arm movement. So the shoulder's able to create more external rotation. And then obviously it's going to have to be accelerated back into internal rotation as the arm goes into extension. So you're going to have a longer range of motion. And I think for throwers, I think one of the biggest things is understanding even more so, I guess, where the placement and timing of the movement comes, meaning that the arm is in a good spot. So like the swing of the arm into the throw is essentially to start to create a little bit of momentum, but it's also meant to get into a position where when the body turns, the arm is in a position to be able to rotate and accept that momentum properly, which is essentially what's going to allow you to have the ability to, let's just call it fatigue less through inefficiency, which hopefully then eliminates some of the risk of injury. But being able to accelerate the arm properly on time, capturing the momentum of the body by being in the right place becomes huge. And deceleration is what's going to play into effect as to how those things happen, how the trunk will slow down and the upper arm will speed up and the upper arm will slow down and the lower arm will speed up. And capturing those in time is really where your velocity is going to come from. So if you want to throw hard, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest concerns that there would be that the body can not only accelerate, but decelerate properly at the right moment to pass energy smoothly from segment to segment.
Okay. So I was thinking as you were talking there, one of the most often injured parts of the body for a hitter, and it exists in a thrower too, but I think of when this happens for a hitter is often in a check swing is a oblique strain. Do you think those oblique strains oftentimes happening in a check swing happen from the lack of training on decel? Do you think that has any influence on that? Or do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think, range of motion always plays a part in that. I know, especially for throwers, having had that conversation, with multiple throwers that their active and passive thoracic range of motion mobility, when that variance is considerably far apart, any sort of like slip, the front foot slips, the body slides into a position that it can't manage, is going to tend to lead to some sort of lower back or oblique strain because the body just can't support that much range of motion. So same thing. I mean, if you're not preparing yourself to be able to stop, like you said initially with how the brain's going to communicate with the body, if the brain isn't used to or prepared to be able to go fast and then stop, and we put it in that position, there's going to be athletes that haven't trained and aren't actually physically strong enough to do that because they haven't trained to have the brakes as much. And when they have to check swing in a game artificially, and then something goes down, that I think definitely plays a part in it. And I think, in our sport, I think rotary stability probably hasn't, I can only speak for, I guess, me and what I've seen. growing up and then even into our sport as we started coaching, rotary stability and everything like that had never really been a huge part of what we trained or what we did in the sport. It was always go in the weight room and do, standard lifting. And,
Sure.
for
I never did one anti-rotation drill in my life.
Right. Even med ball stuff. I mean, you threw some med balls, but it was like you did it because, you had to do some core work for the day. Or guys are just going to go, oh, I got to go do some crunches.
I remember you, I was already an instructor when you were still playing. And I remember you doing the med ball work, but it was all in the sagittal plane. It was all just for the most part, in a linear fashion, right? Like flexion.
Well, especially early. Later on it changed a little bit, but it was other things that had kind of opened up my eyes to it. Like for me personally, like my rotational stability and strength in my last couple of years changed dramatically by doing it. And that part of my workout was probably at least a third, if not a half, of my total workout. So I spent a lot of time. It was actually like saying, instead of like, again, hey, I'm gonna go do 40 crunches because I know I got to strengthen up my core. I want to look like I got a six pack, so I want to do some sit-ups. Or now, like, I see like planks are great, but like a plank just in itself isn't going to give you what you need for what we're doing in this sport. So like you could do planks, but you have to have planks with some sort of rotation, and you need to add a little bit more weight, and you need to work full range of motion with resistance, and you need to have an explosive movement that leads then to a deceleration. And like, so being able to build up to it is important too. But a lot of guys just go like, well, I did my core work. And I'm like, well, what did you do? And I'm like, well, that's you're doing something that somebody that's just trying to be in a gym and stay in shape is doing. You're not trying to do something that somebody that's trying to be a collegiate or professional athlete needs to do for their body. So I think there's just a lot of that hasn't been done. So yeah, when it lead to leading to injury, I think, a lot of people haven't trained the midsection the way that they need to for this sport to be a rotary athlete.
Yeah. And that I think of that in golf because there's a larger population of older golfers just recreationally than there are baseball players. And that often injured piece is the low back of an aging golfer that's playing recreationally, because the science behind this is your thoracic spine right in the middle of your back is meant to be very mobile. Your lumbar spine, the bigger ones at the bottom, are meant to be very stable. What ends up happening when you don't have rotary stability is that your lumbar spine ends up being it begins to decel or stop rotation, but it begins to act like the thoracic, and that's when you get lower back pain. When a stable joint is starting to become unstable because you don't have the rotary stability in muscle to be able to stop that. But I think with that in mind, one of the old school cues that taught us decel when we were young that we didn't ever know was keep your eye on the ball, Johnny. Keep your eye on the ball. The little leaguer pulls out to the pull side. Coach sees that little leaguer pull off to the pull side. He's looking at him after the swing and miss. And we know that you got to be able to see in order to hit, which of course your eye doesn't do. But that is a really good cue to stop rotation. Were you thinking of any? And then I'm going to get into what that does for our direction.
Yeah, I was going to say like not cue, but actual like, the amount of time like I had a hanging tire swing in my yard.
Oh, yeah, it's a great one. Yeah.
The amount of times that I just pelted that thing with my bat, but even then, like, talking about where you get output different ways, like, that without me knowing it, it was just like, oh, how hard can you hit this tire? But the amount of times that my wrists were just completely blown up from like the bat hitting the tire and basically almost immediately stopping, transferring that energy and just stopping, and your wrist just going, oh, but you're like, all right, I'm tough. I'm going to keep hitting it, and but honestly, like, that was another way of like, we did it because like, oh, I got to hit the tire to get stronger. Well, all right. I don't know what that means, but all right, I'll do it because it's fun and something to do. But that was a decel property, and it was how fast can I accelerate, because I know I'm going to probably slow down a little bit before I hit it because I know it's coming at impact anyway. So I'm already starting to shut down a little prematurely, just knowing that there's going to be trauma hitting this tire, you know. Now, if we'd have done that with a split grip, probably would have been a lot smarter.
Yeah, it saved your wrists a little bit. Yeah, hitting the heavy bag. We got a couple heavy bags in the boxing heavy bags in the academy that guys can. Little kids love to whack away at that thing too. It's loud. It's fun just to swing something really hard and hit it violently.
Yeah.
What that does for us then, when Johnny keeps his head on the ball, it allows for a greater distance in the zone with the bat. And we all know that timing is the most difficult part of hitting. In timing is where you make your money, right? If I am on time more often, I square up more balls. I'm a better hitter. I'm a better baseball player. But if I decel poorly, I'm going to carry the bat off my front hip, make, as a right-handed hitter, a left turn a lot sooner, and really miss the money part of the zone. The money part of the zone, we know, and this is just baseball fact, that more damage is done out in front of home plate. So we want our bat to exist in a bigger hitting window out there. That decel, the stop rotation, allows the bat to stay in more of a forward linear line. I used that term linear. That's another full segment we can do. Mark that down, producer Dan, of the old linear versus rotational. We'll do that in a future podcast. But keep the bat in a linear fashion towards the pitcher for greater distance in the zone. And that is crucial for hitters to have a chance, knowing how difficult pitching is today.
So what is a common, if somebody is relatively, let's just say, connected in their swing and has good deceleration and direction, what is a good or standard amount of time in the hitting zone?
I think of it more as like distance in the zone.
That's what I'm saying. So
we do measure time in the zone. I don't know off the top of my head without looking at it what the difference in milliseconds is, but it is that. It's milliseconds in the zone. So and I would say, 1 or 2 extra milliseconds in the zone, but that is a lot. You know, that's milliseconds.
What does that kind of equate to that in distance? Like, what's a good distance to be in that time frame in the zone?
Yeah, I'd have to look that up too. I don't want to misquote incorrectly without looking at hard numbers off the top of my head.
But it's a smaller number in the first place.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking inches, not feet.
Definitely, yeah.
Right.
We're adding 4 to 6 inches in the zone.
Yeah.
That's ballpark estimate, which is a lot, man. That's where your differences of being able to clip an off-speed pitch out in front that you were maybe slightly fooled and making a late adjustment on, and still get a base hit versus the swing and miss strikeout.
So, what do you feel like? Do you feel like there's a benefit then in using a bigger, heavier bat to help promote the feel of deceleration? Meaning, like, to move something longer and heavier, where the weight is farther away from you, you would essentially have to be able to decelerate your last segments, like through the lower arm, through the wrist, through the hands. You would have to decelerate those segments properly to be able to move the heavier object on time, to feel like you're not dragging something through. So what do you feel about a heavier, longer implement to help promote deceleration?
Yeah, I do like that a lot. We've used those 40-40 bats, and we recently using the Birdman overload trainers that are like 37 inches, 37 ounces. And I got that idea from when we were consulting at Clemson, and they do a really good job with their hitting and hitters there, kind of progressive and have some ideas. And that's people I talk shop from time to time, say, hey, what are you doing new? And he sent me some video of the 40-40 bat. I said, oh, that's a great idea for exactly what you're just talking about there, Travis. That's for guys that lose the barrel behind them. You feel that. You feel the weight of that barrel that I can't control it. Guys that push, they can't accelerate the bat till really far forward out in front, kind of flipping the barrel under. But the ability to stop segments to get that heavy object through the zone is just a way of naturally teaching deceleration without having to consciously think about it. And I don't know that that's to an extent that is super rare. I mean, I remember the old videos of like Edgar Martinez taking BP with the donut on his bat, right? There was a reason he was doing that. I don't know. I've never talked to Edgar Martinez about it, but for me, it's maybe in his mind it was strengthening, but in my mind, it's probably more feel of the barrel. But naturally, he was working on decel as well, and he was a really good hitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first time I picked it up and swung it, it probably immediately made me feel like, okay, maybe I was consciously obviously thinking about transferring energy from segment to segment versus just controlling the barrel. But I could feel that the barrel wasn't being able to speed up properly on time because, I'd lost like the hinge in my wrist early, and, not being able to accelerate, decelerate to transfer to that barrel. And the next swing was immediately like, okay, let me just place this at a better time. And it was like, when you figured out how to capture the momentum of that barrel by being able to know when to release or know when to decelerate as well, it felt like sitting back thinking about all the bats that Babe Ruth would use, those big old logs, and these guys were using
huge bats. Those guys.
Like literally like the bats that we're using almost as a trainer, like a 40-40 or 37-40, and just feeling like, man, I could do almost no work if I time this out properly. I can do almost no work and just pound a baseball with very little effort with something that big. Now, at full speed, if you're throwing something out there and the ball's coming full speed, I'm not so sure that I'm coordinated enough to be able to pull that off and get the bat in the right place at the right time. But just like an easy flip or tee, just being able to feel that, I think, helps. And I've used that with, a bunch of kids now, just essentially for that, for a little bit of barrel awareness and feel, simply because a longer bat, you also have to be aware that the barrel's a little bit farther away. So knowing that, just to kind of train barrel awareness. But really a lot of it, where like you said, like there's a lot of guys with the bat will speed up real early because they're losing it, or they're speeding up almost after they're hitting the ball because they can't get their body to accelerate, decelerate at the right times. And that to me is what timing is. Like, I know that, we always talk a lot about timing being like ball out of hand. When is the athlete starting to move towards the ball in their way? But I still feel like in my mind, like there's so much more timing error on actually what and how the body is moving from one piece to the other, which to me is like probably the toughest part of timing, because it's easier for me to just get my foot off the ground earlier and start sooner. It's a lot harder to get my segments to actually be on time.
And that's some awareness in that too, because there are guys that accelerate the bat early. There's people that teach it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get the barrel up to full speed behind me. Well, you're going to lose your wrist hinge as you do so, but I can do that. I can accelerate it early. There's downside to that as well if you're making decisions sooner than you would like to. But having some awareness of that, when do I typically accelerate the barrel? Because there are big league guys that accelerate the barrel, lose their wrist hinge really early, and do have success, albeit that wouldn't be like the ideal textbook way in my mind that you'd want to teach your hitters.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's again, anytime you do anything, there's a bell curve, right? Most people fit in the middle. You've got some people on one end, some people on the other.
Well said.
There's multiple ways to get things done, but most people aren't the guys on the end of the bell curve. Those are more like special people versus most of us who fit, in that middle pyramid. So there's always going to be the outliers at every level. And I think the tough part is, you do get some people that train or teach based off of maybe their favorite player or who they like in the moment. That is an outlier that is really hard for anybody else to replicate. Not that it's bad. I don't think it's bad that people, try different things, like emulate different things and see how things feel. But, trying to pigeonhole somebody into something that's probably more of an extreme is typically not going to go well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For every 2 players you help that can fit into that style of movement, and luckily it's appropriate for their body. There's going to be 8 that's not, right? Yeah, that's why in our mind, teaching into like one philosophy or one camp is just, it's pot luck whether or not you're actually going to help your hitter or not, or your thrower.
100%.
Styles, man, so difficult. Remember when we used to teach? We had this on the podcast a couple weeks ago. The absolutes, like, oh man, I don't know if there are any absolutes anymore. I guess one absolute is you got to decel.
I mean, in this game, at when the ball's moving fast, you have to be able to decel. That's if the ball's not moving off the tee, you're good to go. You got all the distance and space you need to get up to full speed. You can take as long as you need to slow down at the end of it. Like over rotate the heck out of it and just let it eat.
Yeah, I'm gonna get your opinion on this because before I was working in pro ball, I've mentioned on here before, I was a Cardinals fan, and I, as a child, always had my once a summer pilgrimage across the state in Southern Illinois to a Cardinals game. That was like I got one game a year. He's usually in August around my birthday, and that was a huge deal for me. So I took my daughters to just experience that. We went to Busch Stadium. We went through their Hall of Fame, just kind of did some nostalgia time. In the Cardinals Hall of Fame, you can pick up players' bats. And Ozzie Smith was my favorite player growing up. And, Ozzie's not a very big guy. You'd assume that he probably swung a smaller bat. When I picked it up, I couldn't have been more wrong. The dude swung a 35-inch bat, which incredible to me. I was like, holy cow, this thing's it's a log. Why were players then using big, and this goes way back, right? Because you already mentioned it, that guys of yesteryear and some of the greats of the game swung really, really big bats. So let me ask you that question. What is your opinion on that? And why don't players do that today?
I think honestly, it's always funny because I feel like I always have these conversations like the day before we have these podcasts, and I just have these conversations with kids. I've got this kid that he's chasing more and more exit speed. He's a young kid. He's, 14, freshman in high school, young freshman yet, hasn't turned 15. And, he's already hitting balls, 90 plus exit. And, he sees all these other people out there that, are hitting balls 100 miles an hour. And he wants more speed, exit speed. And he keeps chasing, like turning faster. I'm going to use this bat. I'm going to turn faster. And, he might've been using a 31-inch bat. And I'm like, you want to hit the ball harder? I said, turn relatively similar in speed and use a bat that's 2 inches longer and 2 ounces heavier. I'm like, you can manage it. You're strong enough. You're connected enough. So you're not in a disconnected swing where that extra length and weight is going to hurt you. Like you're going to be able to manage it. So I think, a lot of times, if you think about how training modality has changed, it's not like guys, back in the 30s were as physical as athletes are now, simply because of the availability of weights and the availability of free time to do those weights and trainers and programs and stuff like that.
The off seasons were different. These guys were getting jobs in the off season in the 30s and 40s.
Right. So, you look at that and say, okay, well, I can do a little less work with a little bit bigger implement. And as long as I get it there, I'm going to be able to create the same kind of force. So I think, now I think you're going to start seeing waves of that happening. Like when we were growing up, it was like, oh, find a light bat. Like all these kids are like, oh, let's use a 30-inch, 18-ounce drop 12 when you're 11 years old. And I'm like, realistically, for disconnected swingers, there's an advantage because you're going to be able to manipulate and control that barrel easier when it weighs less, when you have to redirect it if you are disconnected. But, if you've got players that have relatively connected swings, and honestly, sometimes a heavier bat helps a kid feel connected because they have to be. So realistically, I think that it's going to and will swing that way. I think, when guys throw harder, people are like, well, I don't know if I can get this thing through the zone. Well, I don't have to, because I don't have to create I don't need as much time to create that rotational speed because I just need to be on time with the barrel getting there. It doesn't have to be moving as fast to do the same damage as it would if it weighed less in a swing. So, I'm not so sure that it's not going to, sway back a little bit and guys are going to, hey, I'm going to do less work on this dude throwing 100. so I can make decisions even later, not have to create as much speed and use a bigger implement to do the job that, my body was previously having to do.
So how did Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle hit the ball so far? And whether this is truthfully measured out or not, I don't know, because there's been speculation either way. But Mickey Mantle was supposed to have hit a 565-foot home run against the Washington Senators. And again, he was really, just looking at him in pictures, looked really, really strong. But can't say that Mike Trout isn't as strong, right? So why were Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle able to hit the ball as far or further than players today?
It's a good question. It could go down probably a lot of different ways, different type of ball, different.
Did it have anything to do with the bat?
I do. Realistically, I think there's still guys that use, relatively bigger bats. I know Soriano had a big bat when he played. I know he's using a 35 or 36-inch bat.
It's pretty rare that guys are using bats that big today. And if you do a bat fitting, players that do bat fitting for the first time are kind of shocked. They're like, there's no way I can swing that bat. Because every time you do a bat fitting, it's going to suggest a heavier and longer bat because of the linear speed you're going to gain. You're going to gain bat speed when you have, assuming that we're turning and decelerating nearly as well. A longer object is a longer spoke. We talked about this at the beginning of the show today. That longer spoke is going to move faster at its end. So it's going to, in a bat fitting scenario, it's always going to grade out that a bigger bat is better for you.
Yeah, I think, then, like I said, it just becomes that confidence issue of, you feel like you're facing something fast and if I've got something smaller, it's easier for me to move versus, the opposite, which is, hey, it's going to move faster. So as long as I'm on time, this bigger implement actually a lot of times benefits. And I don't think a lot of people think about like 1 inch or 1 ounce like it's some dramatic change. 1 inch, 1 ounce, again, in a connected swing isn't that big of a difference.
That's a key thing for, like, especially parents, that we get the bat question all of the time with younger kids, what size bat? And you've mentioned this 3 times now. You say in a connected swing. So even younger players, if they are connected, and a lot of times younger players are not, like I say, you will not feel the extra length or weight in this swing because you are going to keep it tight to your body as you turn, you are connected. But as soon as you're disconnected and you get that thing out away from you early, you're going to feel it. It's going to feel like you're swinging a shot broom, right? Like it's just going to be really like a telephone pole. Long, it's heavy. So that is a really important piece. Like players with better mechanics at a younger age do get the benefit of being able to swing a bigger, heavier, longer bat.
Yeah, or even kids that are stronger. You make up for some disconnection with strength. Your strength will be able to mitigate some of the disconnection because you have strength. So that's the other thing with, chasing strength in the weight room is it gives you an out when you're not moving as well. Not only does it give you more output, but it gives you an out to be able to compensate better in a disconnected situation. Whether even at the pro level, I've been showing this video I saw on the dumpster fire, which is Twitter, as you like to call it. But I've been showing this clip of Mike Trout adjusting to a pitch that in my mind he must have misread. So he's ending up continuing having to chase it with his torso tilting farther over the plate. His arms are disconnected. He's going after a lower away pitch. And
is this an off-speed pitch, like slider running away from him, or?
They only show the in the video. It's only like the last couple feet of the pitch, and then it's basically a close-up on him. But watching his body control, like he ends up having like his back leg will kick back probably like in the video kicks back probably like 4 feet because of how far his torso had to lean over the plate. He had to have something offsetting for balance, and his front foot literally doesn't move. Like he's just found a way to be centered on his foot with his body weight leaning over. But even in a disconnected swing, his additional strength allowed him to be a little bit more disconnected in where his arms were moving with his body, but still being able to control the bat. And you sit and look at something like that, and like it's not easy to do. Like and the ease at which he did it, you're just like, wow, man, like that guy can.
It's the great compensator.
It is. It's a huge compensator, especially when you're at the highest level and you're getting pitches that are doing crazy things. You know, at a young age, the game isn't easy, but it's easier when, you know, you're getting below average off speed stuff with, you know, not as good, obviously, fastball control from a pitcher. So you can kind of sit on pitches more. You can make the guy throw you the fastball because you don't have to sit and like worry about this guy just throwing you breaking ball after breaking ball after breaking ball in any part of the count. So, you know, the game obviously gets harder, and your ability to compensate as you continue to get older becomes more and more necessary. And part of that is strength, and part of it is, you know, body control, and like we started the segment talking about deceleration, like all those things become so hypercritical at the highest level where, you know, as Andy Haynes calls it, it's messy, it's ugly. Like the game's ugly, it's hard. Like you're fighting in every at bat, every pitch for the most part, because it is such a tough thing to do. So
yeah, every pitch of every game, the brain has to solve one of the most complex problems there is.
Yeah.
Identifying and hitting a baseball under the time constraint in which you have to do it. And you do it over and over and over again. It's an incredible way to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Some of the most complex problems your brain is ever going to have to solve, you're doing over and over again.
Yeah. At the highest level, for sure.
At the highest level, yeah. Good stuff.
So before we kick out today, I've been thinking about this week a lot, and I just want to put this in. It has nothing to do with our decel talk. So just a couple notes from being in the cage this week, and this is almost more of just like, I'm just going to call it "Don't be that guy." Okay. So I had somebody that
this could be a new segment, the "Don't be that guy" segment.
Had listening to one instructor working with a player, and you know, just earshot, just kind of hearing what's going on. And first thing I heard him say when his kid walked in the cage was, "What did your brilliant coach have to tell you this week?" And basically what he was saying is, your coach is an idiot. Like, you should listen to what I'm telling you, and whatever this other guy's telling you he's an idiot. Don't be that guy. Like, realistically,
that's insecurity at its finest. Is what it is.
Unless in my mind, like, you don't always have to agree with what somebody else is teaching. Like, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, but I think, you know, being that guy where you're basically throwing somebody else under the bus that this person still probably looks up to as a mentor is just the wrong way to go about it. Like, if you don't agree, and you might not know exactly what this person was having somebody do something for, or why they're narrating it the way they did to this kid, you know, I think there's just easier ways around that, of even if there's some disagreement, of just saying, hey, you know, I kind of understand where he's going. You know, I like to think about it this way, just like navigate a different way. And the other one, the kids, there's two kids that were doing like a group thing, and they must play on the same team. I'm assuming he's talking about their travel coach.
Okay.
But the kids were probably, if I had to guess, probably 14. And then another one was, don't be that guy. Like, I saw a different instructor giving unsolicited advice to like a dad and a kid hitting in a cage. And I sat back and thought, I'm like, I don't think I've ever walked up to somebody in my life and just unsolicited, like, hey, you know, I feel like, you know, if your kid does this better, you know, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, here's my card, you know, meet up with me. Like, don't be that guy. Like, it's more, if you see somebody hitting with their parent in a cage on their own, and you want to be like, hey man, your kid looks good, he's doing a good job. And if that parent from there wants to initiate, oh, thanks, you know, what do you teach baseball? And the conversation goes that way. But like don't, it's so odd for me for just to unsolicitedly walk up to somebody you don't know and just start giving them advice as to what they need to do to be better. So nothing wrong with helping people, but unsolicited is.
I'm going to reiterate, this was not in our facility.
It was not in. It was not in Bradley. No.
So I'm getting ready to go over there now. Having to fire people. I don't do that at the start of my day.
I would have had to fire people for you.
Good segment today, Travis. Don't be that guy. I like it. I'll do one next week. Until next week, producer Dan, thanks a lot. Travis, see you on the field, bud.